Yes, someone has objected to that intro and says, so we say now the best 60 minutes of your day. I only mentioned because I know Jay Bilas would say something if I did. You say what, Homer? All right, Jay Bilas of ESPN. If you don't know who he is, you're listening to the wrong station. And I want to let everybody know this one is going to be put up on Wisconsin On Demand because I want to know what's going on in college sports, and that means I go to my expert, Jay Bilas. Good evening, Jay.
Homer, how you doing?
I'm living the dream. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I'm not sure this is going to be the best 60 minutes of my day, but I'm hopeful.
All right. Well, it's going to be for people listening. The last time we talked about college sports, I said they can't keep paying these coaches. There's not enough money. And your line was, Homer, they got tons of money. Now we moved on. We haven't talked since then. And this is basically information to help all those people out there who have no idea what's really going on. What would you tell them first?
Well, about the current system,
yes,
or kind of what's
sports.
going on right now?
I'm a fan of a school. What the hell's going on? They need money. Is it going to be football only? Everybody has 1,000 questions. I'll get to those. But what would you say that the average fan of a Division I school should feel about his sports teams in the future right now?
Well, they're going to feel the same way. I mean, what I would ask is, how did you feel when your team started, when your school started paying your coaches millions of dollars to coach, or when you started selling your media rights along with other NCAA institutions and the schools in your conference for literally billions of dollars? If that didn't affect your love of the game and how much you support your school, I don't see why athletes being compensated to the level that your school chooses should bother you. To me, it's pretty simple. If these athletes are old enough to sell for billions of dollars, they're old enough to compete in the marketplace with everyone else for their fair market value. I just don't think this is a controversial thing, but I do understand that what we're seeing now and then what we're going to see in the next probably 3 years is going to be an adjustment for some people. They've had it a certain way for a long time, but the way it was illegal. It violated federal antitrust law, and the NCAA is finding that out in some of these lawsuits, especially the House case and the cases tied to it, where they're trying to settle the case now, and they're going to pay $2.8 billion in damages, basically for back wages, to the players that were in that class action lawsuit, and they're also agreeing, if the court approves the settlement, to paying up to 22% of future revenues to athletes over the next 10 years. So we're going to see athletes compensated to a higher level than they have been, and reasonable minds can differ, but I think that's perfectly appropriate. And it's not a mandate now. So it doesn't mean that Marquette or the University of Wisconsin, they don't have to pay anything if they want. They can have volunteer coaches. Everything can be free if they want and play. They don't even have to give scholarships. But now they can. The NCAA is agreeing through the settlement, if it gets approved by the court, that you're going to be allowed to be players can be directly compensated by their schools, which in over 100 plus years of the NCAA, that's never been allowed.
Talking with Jay Bilas. Why did this never happen in the past? People have said to me, the NCAA should have done something against this, and my answer is no, they knew this was going to happen. They just were trying to sell the bluff as long as they could until they lost, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. There was some hubris there that the NCAA just thought they were right. They were always going to have the support of the courts and the legislatures, but it just kind of strains the mind that you could have a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry run off college campuses and be as big as the NBA or the NFL as far as revenues are concerned, and nobody's ever going to point it out, and the players were never going to ask for compensation. It strains the mind. And look, this was avoidable, and it could have been handled in a more orderly fashion, but the NCAA wanted to fight in court over it, and they had some protections for a while. There was a case, what a lot of people don't recognize or understand. When I was in college in the mid-1980s, that's when things really changed. There was a lawsuit where the schools sued the actual members, the member schools sued the NCAA under an antitrust theory, the same theory that the players are suing under now. And back then, there was a gentleman named Walter Byers who was the executive director. They didn't call him president back then, but he was the executive director of the NCAA, and he ruled kind of with an iron fist. And he used to determine out of the NCAA office in Kansas City how often schools could be on television. And it was his and the NCAA's, infinite wisdom that if you oversaturated the television market, people would stop going to games. They would just watch them at home, and that would really hurt ticket revenue, which was the biggest revenue source up to that point. Nobody really contemplated how big television was going to be and media rights were going to be. So the NCAA lost that lawsuit. It was called the Board of Regents case. And once that case was lost by the NCAA, and in some ways it was a win, I'll get to that, but then conferences and schools could go out and sell their media rights. And for a few years, they couldn't figure it out. They weren't sure, do we bundle them together? Do we do it by conference? Do we do it individually? They didn't make a whole lot of money at first, but they figured it out in a couple 3 years, and then the money started exploding, and that's when coaches started making more money. I think I'm right in this, that Coach K, when I played for him, probably made less than $100,000 a year. His last years at Duke, he was making in the $10 to $12 million a year range, and even more than that when you factor in some of his off-court compensation. But there was some language in that case that gave the NCAA some protection, and so they won a lot of court cases over the years. But they lost all of it in a recent case called Alston. The Alston case was about, academic benefits, and they went up to the Supreme Court. The NCAA lost 9-0, and they lost some of the protections they had from that Board of Regents case back in the 1980s. So they understand that going forward, they're not going to win any more of these antitrust cases, and that's why they're trying to settle this current one at a $2.8 billion price tag and concessions going forward to paying athletes. And we'll see if it gets approved. But what that means to me is we'll see what happens. But once this thing's approved in another year, you're going to see schools allowed to pay the players directly. And it'll be normal business. So instead of signing them to a letter of intent, they'll likely just offer the player a contract. And the contract can be whatever the school and the player agree to. Like if I'm approaching you, if I'm Marquette, the head coach at Marquette, if I'm Shaka Smart, I come to Homer True and I say, hey, Homer, we think you're going to be really good here. We'll give you a 2-year contract at $250,000 a year, a scholarship, your housing, stuff like that. But there's going to be a $250,000 a year buyout in there. So if you decide to leave, if you decide to go pro, if you decide to transfer, you're going to owe us $250,000 for every year remaining on the contract. And if you get arrested, we get to terminate. If you don't go to class, if you don't attend 95% of your classes, we get to terminate. Stuff like that. You can put whatever in it you want. And you can also buy up the media rights of a player. Just like, Shaka Smart can't go out and do whatever commercial he wants. Marquette University signs him to an employment contract, and he agrees that he's whatever endorsement deals he does, he has to wear Jordan brand. Like he can't just go out and do a deal to wear Puma. He's got to wear the Jordan brand stuff. But if he gets an offer to do a commercial, he has to run it by Marquette, and they have to okay it. It's really pretty orderly, and it'll be really orderly with players as soon as the settlement gets figured out, and the schools can just do normal business. They do it all the time. I don't know how many employees Marquette has, but I can tell you this: where I went to school, Duke University has 30,000 employees. They don't stay up at night saying, "What do we pay everybody?" I mean, do we pay the president of the university more than we pay the head of the landscape department? Like, what do we do? They don't do that. They know what everybody's worth, and they know what the market is.
Talking with Jay Bilas. I want to get to the future, the 22%, but $2.8 billion. How do they come with that? It's back wages to former players. Are you going to get anything? Is Tony Smith going to get anything? How did they determine this passed? Because they've basically said now you can get it, right? But why not go back to 1970?
They can't. They can't. There's a number. There's a limit to it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know exactly how far it goes back, but you have to be a member of the class, and they do that in a class action thing. So it's a number of years, but I don't know exactly what that is.
Nobody really cares that much anyway. They're going to agree to it, or if they've come close to agreeing to it.
No, they've agreed to it.
Oh,
they've
okay.
agreed to 2 point. They've agreed. So the parties, the plaintiffs, the players, and then their counsel have agreed to accept $2.8 billion in damages. And they've agreed to a future sort of revenue share, if you will, of a cap of 22%.
22% of what? 22% of what? The sport
of all the broadcast revenues
for that support, or for the school?
For the entire enterprise. So I don't know whether it goes to, well, it'd be by school, but I don't know whether it goes to ticket revenues and how many T-shirts
will golfers or will track people get access to that? My assumption was all the money's going to go to the sports that generate income, but am I wrong?
It could be. It depends on what the school wants to do. Every school can do whatever they want to do. Just like, okay. I don't know any school where the golf coach makes as much as the football coach. They don't. The world doesn't work that way, and it's not going to work that way with athletes. The best athletes will make more money, and the more visible athletes will make more money. Just like if we wanted everything to be fair, every basketball player at Marquette would play the same amount of minutes and start the same amount of games and go to the same amount of press conferences. They don't do it that way because it's not Halloween where if you dress up, everybody gets a piece of candy. It doesn't work that way. So it's not that big of a deal. And if Marquette or Wisconsin decides, hey, look, at our place, we're going to pay everybody the same. So if we give you a uniform, everybody's going to make the same amount of money. And then see how it works out for them in the marketplace. Because whoever's recruiting against Marquette, Purdue's going to say, nope, Zach Edey's getting more than the last guy on the bench. And money is going to be a factor for everybody, just like it is with us. Like, I don't think I'm talking out of school, but if ESPN decided they're going to pay everybody the same, I think a lot of us would be out of there.
Well, but I would fear for, and I'm not defending them, but I would fear for smaller sports because if it's 22%, I want to give the money to the people that are generating the money for us. I like swimming, but
it's not like swimmers are treated the same as football players now anyway.
Correct,
Their facilities aren't as good and all that. I mean, this is America, and it's a meritocracy. Schools are going to have whatever sports that are important to them and that are important to their people, and they're going to spend efficiently based upon where revenues come in. So, of course, I don't know how the swim team at all these schools travel, but I promise you they're not traveling like the football team. And now we can argue as to whether that should be, but nobody's complaining about it now. Like, I don't see anybody out there beating a drum saying, wait a minute, why is our wrestling team not getting as much attention and as much money as our football team? Nobody
I sense you're saying the same to me that you said the last time we heard. Homer, it'll be different, but calm down. It'll be okay.
It's already okay. Like the NCAA told us for 100 years that if athletes are ever paid, people are going to stop watching, that amateurism was a fundamental principle that was vital to the enterprise. And we went to NIL, and ratings went up, and more people were interested than not. There's always a fringe of folks that say, well, it's ruined it. I'm not watching anymore. They said that when the reserve clause was struck down in baseball and you had free agency, and baseball's more popular than ever. They said it when amateurism was taken out of the Olympic charter in the 1970s, and the Olympics are coming up in July. They're more popular than ever. People don't care whether athletes make money. They just don't care. And I'm sure there have been people saying at some point or another that the NFL, it's unsustainable that a quarterback makes that much money. Yeah. Well, clearly it's sustainable because they're making more than ever, and the NBA is about to sign a new contract. We're going to have, at some point in the near future, $100 million a year basketball players in the NBA. They'll make over $1 million a game, and people are still going to watch. They just don't care, just like they don't care how much Beyonce makes or Taylor Swift makes.
All right.
They like the music.
Can we take a quick break? Because I just have other questions I want to ask, but I will tease with this. So this means NIL is dead.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, all right. Well, can we keep you for a couple more minutes so you can explain that?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Round 2, Jay Bilas. Yeah, it's the best 60 minutes of your day, for sure. I don't know about him, but I know about the rest of us. Next. The second quarter with Jay Bilas. What's going to happen in college sports? Calm down. It'll be okay. But no one's going to know, Jay, how to complain. The team's not good because you're not spending enough money. It's 22%. Maybe you're not spending it right, or are my donations to the school going to be tax deductible? But back to NIL will still continue.
Yes, it can continue. But like I said before, if you enter into a contract with a player, you can buy the player's media rights if you want to.
So it's not going to be like it is now.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It just sort of depends on how you want to do it. And but one of the things about NIL, when you make a donation to a collective, there's a school of thought out there that at some point the IRS is going to come in and say, no, that's not a charitable donation. It's not deductible. When if the schools can just pay the players directly, you can go back to the old way of just giving all your donation to the school. You write it off as a charitable donation, then the school decides how they want to pay it out. It's really not that big of a deal. It's not like you didn't have your charitable donation when they were paying the coach, $5 million.
No, but I mean, it's going to be easier. I thought that the NIL, they said it was tax deductible, but I'm not sure that it was. But this is just because you're donating to the school. All right, so what do you want to tell about? Like, how are you going to know? Like, the schools are going to have to all hire somebody to decide what you're going to pay players? That's a general manager in other sports. What do you see how this is going to play out?
Well, they already have general managers at a lot of these schools and personnel people, just like you'd have a recruiting coordinator, stuff like that. I mean, everything's changed. So it's really not that big of a deal. I mean, look, if you know who to recruit and who to give a uniform to and who to put in the game when you want to win, you know how much they're worth and how much you're willing to pay. And it's really not that big of a deal. And just like you said, if people say, well, are we not winning just because our coach isn't good or our players aren't good or it's because we're not spending enough money? I mean, those calculations were all made over the last 50 years because they were saying, well, is it because we don't have good enough facilities or is it because our arena isn't good enough or, whatever. There have been all kinds of things that factor into winning. And the coaches like to call it an institutional commitment. But some schools that don't have gold-plated facilities do really well in their sports, and other ones that have Taj Mahals get their butts kicked.
So are we going to have football, 50 schools in this separate conference, or yes or no? I mean, do you know or do you think?
I don't know, but I don't think it matters. Because, tell me who outside the top 50 is even competitive in football now.
I agree with you. I'm not going to argue. I agree with you totally. Like they say, well, this is going to make it better for the big schools. They already exist. There can't be an edge to the big schools any more than it already is right now, I guess. I don't.
Yeah, when schools are allowed to pay, the same players are going to go to the same places.
Right.
You might have a couple players here and there, but, the NCAA has always made it sound like once you can pay, then the top 5 quarterbacks in every class are going to go to Alabama, and they're going to be 20 deep at quarterback. Well, that's absurd. No quarterback would sit, the second best quarterback in the country is not going to sit behind the best quarterback. And different schools are going to be able to pay more as their best recruit for Alabama.
What's going to happen to the transfer thing?
Well, that's where the contracts will help. If you sign somebody to a contract with a buyout, you're going to see movement really decrease.
Okay.
So it's not going to be as big of a deal. You'll still have transfers. But once you start paying them, you can start putting contract conditions in that will limit the amount of transfers. And then they're also going to have, the scholarship restrictions will be gone going forward. So you can give a scholarship to anybody you want, but you'll have strict roster limits. So a basketball team, I don't know what the limit will be, but a basketball team might be a 12-man roster. Football might be an 85-man roster. And they can't go above that. So does it mean you might not be able to have walk-ons? That's possible. But what will happen is somebody who would have been a walk-on at Alabama will now accept a scholarship at Central Michigan.
Yep.
So you'll have that kind of movement. But to me, it's just part of the business. We're going to have some things that'll be a little bit different. But my question is always, even when people say, well, they're going to have to cancel sports, like there it goes, cancel sports. First of all, I don't accept that as true. But if we do see that in certain instances, what people are really saying is athletes should remain unpaid so these other people can play.
Yeah. No, I said when I'm a college basketball player, I didn't know Mother Teresa was part of the deal. That's not my job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not right because none of the coaches are taking a discount so they can have a rest.
All right, 22% of future ed. That means that the SEC schools or the schools that are they're going to have way more money than everybody else of 22%. Am I right?
That's right, and that's why, Homer, when you hear people complain, especially NCAA people like administrators, ADs, and the like, when they complain about competitive balance when it pertains to athlete compensation, this is where they're talking out of both sides of their mouths. If they wanted competitive balance, they would revenue share, and they're never going to do that because, like you say, the SEC and the Big Ten, they want to keep their money and they want to keep their influence. They don't want to share it with the masses. What they want to have happen is the athletes play for free, or they play for expenses only. They play for a scholarship only. And then all the administrators get to pay themselves. That's what they liked. They loved that system.
All right, so basketball schools have basketball only. Well, they're at a disadvantage. Not really, because the schools that have football and basketball, they got to be concerned about football first, I would assume. And so I don't know, is it going to be better for the basketball schools that don't have football, or am I making something up again?
I don't know the answer to that. Like, I don't know the exact revenues of the Big East, which is a basketball-centric conference. But so when you don't have football, obviously you don't get the football revenue, but at the same time you don't have the football expenses either. So, maybe look, I've been surprised how incredibly competitive the Big East has been since its reformation after the original Big East kind of broke
Thanks
up.
to UConn.
No, it's not just UConn. I mean, all the programs.
Yes.
Yeah, they've in Marquette. I mean, they've all been very good. And I sort of thought that it might be a tough road to hoe for them, and it hasn't been. And now they may. Who knows? It may be in the future when revenues keep exploding. If the Big East or, like you're saying, the basketball-centric schools.
Well, if some schools will drop football because they can't compete, I mean, they're not going to leave the big conference. Will the conference kick them out? You always wonder about the weakest.
I don't know. Look, if I were king, I would think there need to be a lot of changes in the way the NCAA does. But when I say NCAA, I mean all the members, not just the office in Indianapolis. But, to me, it's ludicrous that all these conferences run all their teams all over the place when it doesn't make sense.
Right, you can do that you can just have divisions and they don't travel very far, and you can solve that pretty quickly. Sure.
Yeah, you can have regional schedules, and the reason you can tell that is a number of teams and a number of schools in the Big Ten or whatever, these different conferences, they have hockey programs, and not everybody has a hockey program, so they have kind of a separate thing for hockey. You could do it and have it sports specific, but the problem is, there are media rights contracts in place for all these conferences, and some of these other sports that we're talking about, the quote unquote Olympic sports, they have inventory that the networks own, and that inventory is valuable. Even though people don't think softball is as big a deal as football, and it's not, it's still valuable.
I always said I wanted you to be president of the NCAA, but I'm not sure I can say that anymore because I think they want somebody who's a political expert who can get laws passed that are necessary to help the NCAA. Am I correct on that second part?
Well, that's what they have. They hired
correct.
Charlie Baker, and he's the former governor of Massachusetts. But that's a great point, Homer. What's happening? So this has been purposeful, this settlement of the House case by the NCAA. It's pretty clear to me anyway, at least I think it's clear, what the NCAA is trying to do. They're trying to settle this case, and if the court out in California, the Ninth Circuit, approves the settlement, the NCAA is going to take that settlement to Congress and say, here, let's drop this in your lap, make this law for us so that we're protected from antitrust lawsuits going forward. I don't know if Congress would ever do that, But to me, what's happening is the NCAA is agreeing to an illegal wage cap that just is 22% higher than their old illegal wage cap. And they're trying to bind athletes going forward over the next 10 years to that. So at 22%, revenues are going to continue to go up, and absent some calamity.
And somebody's going to file a suit saying 22% isn't fair.
Not if Congress makes it into a law.
Correct.
If Congress makes it into a law,
right.
then the antitrust complaints go away.
And that's what they want.
Yeah, well, that's what they want, because they basically want to have they want a salary cap without having to bargain for it. And what my thing is, like, that's what I would ask the court before there's any approval of this settlement. What I would ask is, where is the cap on any other aspect of this industry? There's no cap on coaches' salaries. There's no cap on facility spending. There's no cap on anything. The only cap is on athletes. And to me, that seems unfair and wrong, especially when it's proven that the athletes are the revenue drivers. Like, one of the reasons that NIL exploded is because everybody knows who the most valuable assets are. It's the players.
Right.
You can win. I mean, you're not going to win just with Nick Saban as your coach. Nick Saban's got to have players, and if he doesn't have players, he's not going to win.
So we will talk again, but I'll be watching things, watching what happens with as you said, with the what's the name of it? I call it the $2.8 billion.
Yeah, it's basically called the easiest way is the House case. It's a 3 or 4 cases.
And what happens in terms of trying to create the law and all that kind of stuff. So calm down. Everything will be okay. Is that the way to when people ask me, what did Jay Bilas say? He said they got enough money. Everything will be okay. Is that fair?
I think it is.
Okay.
I mean, it just strains the mind that the industry generates $18 billion a year, and they want to say they don't have enough money for their
By
swimming
the industry,
program.
you mean college sports?
College sports, $18 billion a year. I think they can get by.
All right, Jay, thanks again, and golf ball's coming, and look forward to our next discussion when you can help us again. Thanks.
Always a pleasure, Homer. Thanks for having me.